thank you everyone for coming today. Hopefully I've been enjoying the presentations. Hopefully they've been relevant to you. My name is Bert Wagner, and today we're going to be talking about production-ready chatbots. So this presentation is going to be more focused on my experiences with building a production chatbot, and so it'll be less technical. Here is exactly how you write the code, and more about, let's talk about the considerations for how to build something that people will enjoy using. So first off, right, probably familiar with some of these devices, some Google Home, Alexa, Siri. Who like uses these on a regular basis? Things like this, or OK Google on your phone. Right, okay, half the room. What do people like using them for? Yeah. Music. Okay, so you tell them play some music for me. Okay, what else? What do people use them for? Alarms. I use that a lot too. What else? Home automation, so like turning lights on, things like that. I love that. I used to be really against like the smart lights and smart bulbs. I'm like, man, it's not hard to turn a switch to, turn a light on. Who needs that? And then I got some, and then I became addicted, and I absolutely love just, having all my lights turn on when I get home and all that. So yeah, very cool. One of my favorite things besides the home automation, right, is to-do lists, the shopping list. Whenever I run out of milk, I'll just tell my Alexa, hey, add milk to my shopping list, and it gets done, right? So it's a major convenience. And these are all examples of chatbots, right, in a sense. These are all audio-driven chatbots. There's also other kinds of chatbots, right? They could be similar to like what Matt was talking about at the last presentation, right, on Twitter or on these other kind of messaging channels. You could have bots that automatically respond to people or take some kind of action to process some data. You have things like customer service bots that maybe will help you solve a problem, or you can do fun things like ask them what their favorite ice cream flavor is. And all of these things are examples of chatbots, right? There's no one siloed definition of exactly what that chatbot is. You can apply it a lot of different ways, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in today's presentation. Quick little bit about me. I'm a YouTuber and a blogger. I run a YouTube channel where I make lots of videos about data, particularly from a developer's perspective. I do a lot in the SQL Server community, and I have a fun time with that. I try to get blog posts and videos up on a weekly basis, so if you're into that, please check that out. But YouTube doesn't pay the bills. They barely cover my expensive coffee habits. So as a day job, I work as a developer at Progressive Insurance. And not like a AI developer or anything like that, but I did have experiences where I attended an event like this maybe a couple years ago, and I just kind of got this broad idea of what tools are out there. And that's where I learned about cognitive services from Azure and stuff. And I thought, okay, I don't know how I'm ever going to apply this in my day job. It doesn't really apply. And then one day, someone asked me, a product manager asked me, hey, could you do this? And of course, my ego was like, yeah, I could do that. And I realized I can solve this problem that this person's having, not just the normal way I would code a solution to it, but I can use one of these new technologies that I learned about. And I ended up building a chatbot that was successful enough to be actually put into production, and now it gets used thousands of times a day. It's not that chatbot there with Flow there, different chatbot. But the point is, right, the things you learn at events like this are really cool, because even if you don't have an immediate use for them, try to find a use for them. It could be like what Matt was talking about with, doing something for fun with soccer teams and sentiment of users. It could be something like what Sam showed us this morning with Microsoft Lewis, right? If you have an idea of, I can scan maybe some of our, internal documentation to find pieces of words and, do something with that, then do it. It might become something that, enhances your career and lets you grow even further as a developer. So with that said, let's talk about chatbots. Why do we care about chatbots at all? So I'll give you a second to just read this. Right? Millennials like chatbots is what this gets summarized down to. So in this study that was done, 74% of millennials prefer using chatbots in drive-through fast food restaurants versus 55% of older generations, which is still a big number, right? This isn't millennial specific in that sense. Everyone likes using chatbots. If we look at other industries, retail, banking, insurance, those numbers are high. Yeah, they're not going to be 100%. No one's going to love using chatbots 100% of the time, but there are significant amounts of your customers that prefer using chatbots over, the alternative. Medical offices. The key thing, though, and this statistic upset me a little bit when I read it, right? Because I'm a millennial, right? And so it said, okay, 2 out of 5 millennials think that chatbots provide better service than humans. And I was like, oh, that's not me. I like interacting with humans. I like talking to people. I'm not part of that statistic. And then I started thinking about, well, I do like it when a company can just have a little chatbot that says, oh, when are your hours of operation? And then it just tells me instead of me actually having to wait on hold to talk to somebody, or, where are you located? Or, simple things like that. I actually do like using the chatbots a lot more than I initially thought. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind. Chatbots typically won't be your solution to solve all of your business problems, but they are very good at very specific use cases, and they can definitely widen your audience in terms of who your customers are. Like my own experience, I'm not going to talk about the chatbot I built today during this presentation because I didn't get all the legal and paperwork filled out to talk about it, but in general, right, it opened up the bottom of our funnel. So if you think about all the people who are spending money, right, it increased the bottom of our funnel by 20% just because of how, some people just really like using chatbots. So it's a big opportunity. If you're able to program something, you're going to get a lot more sales or a lot more, better customer interaction or things like that. All right. We talked about the user preferences part of it, but there's plenty of other reasons to use a chatbot. One of which is user experience. So, most people here shop on Amazon, probably. I see one hand. You're either all lying. Okay, there we go. Cool. I know it's shameful to have those boxes show up like every 2 days on your doorstep, but that's how the world works nowadays. But you can use a chatbot and have much better user experience. So think about how in the past, if you needed to make a return or something, you would have to call someone up and you'd have to say, hey, I want to return my product. And they'd be like, okay, do you have your receipt number? And you'd be saying, okay, G653, whatever, over the phone, and it would not be fun. Right now with chatbots, so this is right on Amazon's chatbot, they give you options, right? So you don't even have to talk necessarily or type to this chatbot. They're just going to give you 4 items of, most common things you may want to do. That makes a much easier experience. And then in terms of then actually which product do I want to return, I don't have to tell them, oh, it's this coffee maker or whatever, and then they're trying to search through your history. Which coffee maker? Bert, because you spend too much money on coffee products. Which specific one do you want to return? I could just actually pick, right? There's APIs behind the scenes driving this of my purchases, and so I could actually just choose exactly which item I want to return. It's a much better experience to me, the end user, to be able to do that. Additionally, chatbots help triage. So in that example, if I did want to return my coffee maker, right, I could have just done it all myself. I could have done it self-service, right, and I didn't have to interact with a human being for that purposes, which I'm sure saves Amazon a lot of money because they're able to handle, some percentage of their traffic just self-service through this chatbot. Now, that doesn't mean that they need to, that they can get rid of all their customer service. There are some questions, right, that still will require human interaction that are too complex for me to ever want to try to program logic into a chatbot to get it to work. But, for your business, whatever you work on, it's a huge help to be able to take some of those basic requests, some of those things that, are commonly being asked, and reduce the load of your customer service people, and just kind of answer it automatically through a chatbot, or help your customers via a chatbot. Leave those customer service people open to be able to help you with, the really complex problems, because then your customers are going to be happier too that, the wait times are shorter, and they're able to speak to a real human about those complex problems. Let's talk about what happens, how when you ask something to a chatbot and how it works. So let's say if I ask my Alexa at home, what's the weather, right? Because maybe I'm under the covers and the blinds on my windows are shut and I have no idea what it's like outside. I'm too lazy to get out of bed. I want to know what the weather is. So the first thing that happens, right, I'm saying my audio, my voice, that has to get transcribed into actual text. Everything we deal with is text, text-based, so if we're starting out with some audio, we have to transcribe it. And that's where there's all those different services, like those Azure Cognitive Services, right, there's a few of them, I forget what they're called, but for kind of text-to-speech type work. Once we have the text of that phrase, we go through this process, right? We do the natural language processing. And this is kind of what we saw in those first two presentations today, where we pick apart the phrase to identify different parts of the sentence. And then once we understand what that sentence is saying, oh, this person wants to check the weather, right? Maybe we integrate it with other applications. Maybe we do an API call to some weather website to actually find out what the weather is. And then the weather API responds back to our application, and we can, output that to the user. It's sunny and 78 degrees outside. Obviously, I didn't build this presentation today. But at a high level, this is how chatbots work. And you could replace Alexa right here. I did an Alexa because I think a lot of people are familiar with it. But if you're just doing a text-only kind of, customer service chatbot, it's the same thing. You just skip the first step where you're converting the audio to text. You're always kind of starting with text in a chatbot. And today's session, I'm really going to be focusing on this middle portion here. So we're not going to get into how do we call other APIs or how do we do that transcription part. It's really what can we do as part of our chatbot's logic to make it a good customer experience, to make the people using it satisfied that they're getting the right answers that they need, as well as the, just having a good experience with it as opposed to having to call in or something like that. So there's numerous qualities of a good chatbot. First one is that it needs to be empathetic, right? So if you have a chatbot on a website, right, where maybe, you're shopping for clothes, it could be pretty light, pretty happy. You can maybe crack some jokes. You're having a good time. You're shopping. You're spending money on something fun. Your chatbot can reflect that. It can have a personality, right, that's fun and can joke around. Maybe you let it respond to some kind of joke questions, like that example I showed you earlier. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? Right? You can program for stuff like that. And that gives people, it just gets people liking your chatbot. It makes it feel less robotic. You do have to consider, though, what the purpose, the business purpose of your chatbot is. Because if you're building a chatbot for like a credit card fraud line, right? You lose your credit card or someone stole your credit card, maybe you don't want your bot to be joking around with the customer, right? It's a little bit more serious scenario. You want to take that into account. You want to be empathetic to the customer's needs. Maybe just kind of cut back on the jokes, right? Be more serious, be more straightforward with what you need to do. So it's important to kind of think about those things, about who the users are, right? Because as developers, we're gonna dive into the technical stuff of how do I get this, how do I parse my sentence, how do I program it, and that's all really important. But I want to stress the importance of also these really human kind of traits that you do have to apply to chatbots. Otherwise, you may get some bad feedback. Non-repetitive is another important thing, right? We don't want these chatbots to feel robotic. That's not to say that you should, try to trick someone into thinking they're talking to a human or anything like that, but there is something nice about being able to talk to a computer and just not have it always respond to the same thing. So if you're building a chatbot that a particular user is going to have to use multiple times, build in some variation. If it's saying hello all the time, right, as a starting phrase, that's cool, but make it say hi or howdy or, whatever other kind of greeting phrases you want to say, because then at least your users won't be tired of interacting with it. And that's very important. All right, handling unexpected cases. So I know we're all good developers here. We try to program for all the things we think are going to happen, but at the end of the day, with chatbots in particular, there's no way you're going to know everything that your chatbot's going to handle. You may think you know, right? And then you have a set of requirements that say my chatbot needs to be able to do this, 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 this. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with end users who can type in whatever they feel like into this program that you've written. And so you need to be able to handle those unexpected cases, because otherwise the customer is just going to have a bad experience. And if you're using this as a way to drive sales and things like that, that's not a good thing. Not to mention all the negative public sentiment that you'll get on Twitter or whatever else if your chatbot does something stupid. So you need to be able to handle those unexpected cases because users will type in crazy stuff into your chatbot. Users will type in things that just don't even make sense to you. Like I mentioned in the morning, if you were here for Sam's session, right, that Sam was typing phrases very cleanly. The first time I built my chatbot, I had populated with all this training data of auto-corrected sentences where everything was perfect. And then the first time we did like a test run with a group of users, man, I can't imagine, I couldn't believe how bad people are at typing and making typos and just dropping words and the craziest spellings I've ever seen in my life, right? There is no way you will be able to handle every single edge case, right, of what a user is going to try to do in your chatbot. So you need to be able to kind of handle those unexpected cases gracefully. All right, short circuits. This is kind of similar. So let's test out the honesty in the room. I know that took a little bit after I asked about how many people shop on Amazon. It took a little bit to raise hands. But who here, when they call in to customer service somewhere and they get some terrible phone tree that just isn't understanding them, just starts cursing? Okay, honesty goes up, right? Because that's like a known short circuit in a lot of those systems. If you get on the phone and you start cursing, it's going to take you to a real person because they can tell that you're really unhappy. And I love when that happens because then I'll get the customer service representative and I'm just happy, super happy because I only had to wait 1 minute instead of 30 minutes trying to fight this terrible phone tree or whatever. But that's going to happen too, whether it is people, truly angry with something. You want to kind of prioritize those interactions and get them maybe to a real person so they don't get more angry. Or if it's just someone goofing around, you want to code for those kinds of scenarios. And it's really important too for those scenarios where maybe someone is cursing, right? Don't make it back into your training data unexpectedly. There's a funny story. I think it was Microsoft. It was a few years ago. They built some kind of Twitter bot that was real time taking in people's responses and putting it back into the logic for how the bot was trained. And it turned out in a matter of a few hours, this became the most horrendous racist bot in the world, right? Because they weren't filtering any of the data. They were just taking all the data coming in and just putting it into the machine learning model. So don't do that either. And finally, right, make sure your chatbot can handle multiple inputs at once. And this depends what your chatbot's doing. So let's say I build a chatbot to make a reservation for restaurants. As a user, I want to go in to this application, to this chatbot, and be able to say something like, all right, I'd like a reservation for 2 at 5 p.m. next Friday at McDonald's, right? And of course, McDonald's doesn't do reservations, so your bot should handle that. But ideally, I want to be able to say that as a single sentence and have the chatbot understand all those individual pieces of information, right? The 2 people next Friday, 5 p.m., McDonald's, right? And be able to process all that and make the actual reservation. As opposed to an unintelligent chatbot I may say that phrase, give me a reservation for 2 people at 5 p.m. next Friday at McDonald's, and then the chatbot might respond with, oh, I see you want to make a reservation. How many people are in your party? And then we're going back to that whole phone tree thing again, where you just start cursing because now you're going to have to sit through 5 or 6 questions that are just really repetitive. So I'll show you how that works in one of the examples, but really try, if you are trying to collect several inputs from your user, if your user gives them to you up front, don't make their life miserable by continuing to ask them over and over. All right, choosing tools. So we're going to look at a spectrum of options here. The first is your open source tools, right? So there are a lot of different natural language processing and chatbot frameworks that are out there that are completely open source. They're great. Some of them are targeted for different, technical stacks and stuff. If that is your cup of tea, go for it. Then there's like your NLP as a service, so natural language processing as a service. These are things like Microsoft Lewis, right? You don't have to know anything about how to build and train a machine learning model to use Lewis. You just kind of type in your example phrases of, I'd like to get a car, I'd like to get a red Mustang, right? And it kind of figures that out, and it builds your machine learning model for you behind the scenes without any real effort from you. Those services are on all the major cloud platforms. They all work really well. I've used all the platforms here except for Google's, but I'm sure it's fine. The feature sets of all of them are about the same, right? So there's a lot of considerations for, which tool do I use? Features of the tools themselves probably aren't going to be your deciding factor. It'll be other things like, what cloud provider does my company, make me use? That'll help you make a decision real quickly. Right, and then there's full service options. So where we went from the open source side of the spectrum, where you're coding everything from scratch, maybe it's some Python library and you're having to write a lot of code to get things working and you're training your models, right? On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have entire frameworks and services which kind of just build a chatbot for you. And some of these services are actually so easy to use and user-friendly to use, you don't even really need to be a developer to use them. We use IBM Watson Assistant, and when I've tried that out, they have a whole GUI, and we'll do a demo with it. But it is so simple that you could, realistically, if you have really smart business analysts, really technical business analysts, I should say, right? They'd be able to program their own chatbots, which you might be thinking like, well, why do we want to do that? It's like, well, there's so many opportunities where if you can build some internal tool for frequently asked questions or something and have the business actually own it, and then you're helping implement it and integrate it into your, the rest of your IT systems and stuff, that's a huge win, because training these bots and things like that, you need a lot of business-specific knowledge, and that might be a great project for you to do. So it's important to know, right, all these different tools exist. They're all relatively the same in terms of features. So how do you, right, choose which ones you want to use? Well, you have to consider, right, okay, does your company have data scientists? If you have a whole data science team, right, maybe you go with one of these open source options, because the benefits there, even though it takes longer and there's a lot more coding involved, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of if you have very specific language that your chatbot needs to be able to handle, right? Very subject matter specific kind of language. You're going to have a lot more flexibility in kind of building something from scratch as opposed to using like a fully hosted service. And that's kind of how everything that we code works, right? If you take the kind of easy solution, it'll be quick to set up and quick to use, but at some point you're going to hit a ceiling with how flexible you can be with that solution. Versus if you're building something from scratch, it's going to take more time, but you're going to have more control over the output. Are you in the cloud or not? Or can you easily access the cloud? Obviously, if your company is not working in the cloud today, chatbots are actually a great beginner kind of entry into the cloud because they have so few dependencies. and especially on things like data and things. You don't need to migrate your databases right up to the cloud to start using chatbots. You can just kind of use them. So consider that. But if you're not in the cloud, once again, maybe you don't use the fully hosted cloud service. Maybe you use one of these middle API ones, or once again, kind of the open source libraries. Who will own this bot? Like I mentioned, I do think there's a good case for some types of bots, especially for internal usage, for kind of business owners to maintain the logic and actually be able to create the bots themselves. You know, your tech stack and what languages you program in, that's going to be a deciding factor. Like stuff like Microsoft and things like that, they offer several SDKs in different languages, obviously .NET, but things like Python and Java, they may have, right? So just check before you pick one if your tech stack is supported, right? And then same thing with your infrastructure stack. If you're going to roll out a bot to maybe your customers, and you have millions of customers, are you going to be able to handle the load of serving a chatbot to millions of customers? If you are, great, you could really pick any of these options. If you're not an expert at scaling to that level, I recommend you maybe go with one of the, the service options where, yes, you're going to be paying for that, but those services scale really well. So that's like a set of headaches that you don't even have to deal with. And so we'll briefly go over the terminology here. So we've already encountered this today, right? But intents are the verbs of what you are trying to do. I'm going to focus on just these two. I'm going to define two words that Sam already graciously helped define, and so did Matt a little bit, I think. But this is going to be important for the rest of the demos today, right? So your intents are things like, I want to check the weather. I want to cancel my reservation. I want to make a reservation, right? That's what we're going to be trying to capture with an intent. It's what's the purpose of the phrase, right, that the user is telling us. Turn on my Christmas lights, right? That's a home automation example, right? I have all my Christmas trees and Christmas lights hooked up to some smart switches, right? So I can control them from anywhere I want. So while intents are the verbs, entities are the nouns and what we're acting on, and we're going to look at some examples where we can reuse our code by means of being able to pick out these different parts of the sentence. So maybe we check the weather, maybe we check the sports score. Maybe we're creating a reservation for a restaurant, maybe we're making an appointment at a doctor's office. Instead of turning on the Christmas lights, maybe I'm shutting my garage door because I forgot when I was leaving the house in the morning to shut it. Let's jump over to demos. And while I'm getting this ready, just as a funny story, cloud demos are hard because a lot of these cloud vendors do a lot of maintenance work on the weekends when businesses aren't using them as much. And so the region I was in was apparently down for maintenance from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. today. I found that out this morning while I was sitting over here watching other people present, and I was like, oh man! It turns out I just needed to open up in a different region, and that worked fine. So that was just kind of funny. But I am going to be using IBM Watson Assistant today because I don't really want to. I don't want the focus of this presentation to be on code, right? I don't know what language everyone programs in. I want to focus on the features of making a good chatbot, and for that, in the 30 minutes that I have left, right, the Watson tooling I think is the most visual. It's the most easy to understand for someone who's never dealt with this stuff before. So don't let that drive your decision of like, oh, Bert used this, so you should use this in your production systems. I'm using this because I think it's the best teaching tool in a short amount of time, as we'll see. But this will look very familiar to some of the Lewis stuff we were doing this morning. And so let's start out by just kind of creating an intent, right? And so remember, that's kind of what our person is trying to achieve. So if I create an intent, let's say we want to try to get a live representative or a human, right? So I may say, oops, caps lock is on. We're going to create an intent called get human. And so then we need to populate it with training data, right? So give me a human. For the minimalists out there, we just say human. I'd like to speak to a person, and so on and so forth. And what I kind of brought up this morning, in a production chatbot, I typically try to get 100 pieces of training data for each of my intents. It's not like a hard rule or anything. It just seems like for my intents that I only have 20 or 25 examples, I'm getting a lot of, mishits on that. So I have to add more examples to get more. Once I get over 100, I've tried a few with, 200 or 300. You start getting really overfitting of the data, and unless a user, is really specific with what they say, that doesn't work either. I found 100 to be a kind of pretty good number. And so you may ask, how do you get 100 pieces of training data? You either crowdsource it to your coworkers and say, hey, here's this Excel file, please go fill in the phrases of how you would ask for these kinds of things. Or you run a proof of concept app or something like that and collect all the users' input and use that as your training data. Over time, once you have something in production, right, obviously you'll analyze all those conversations coming in, and then you can modify that training data over time. Just when you're starting out, getting a lot of training data is hard, but it's really important. So with this intent that we've created, right, we have that's all done. Let's just do that. And let's actually create one more intent while we're here. So it'll help with the example. And we're going to do our need help intent. So this is, right, someone requiring help with maybe some product. So, I need help. There's maybe one piece of training data we want to add. Or I need help with socks. I don't know. Another piece. I need some assistance, and so on and so forth. Right? We can add a lot. Hopefully my lack of training data will not negatively impact my demos. We'll see. It'll be fun. But these are our intents, and inside Watson, right, they use pound signs. That's how we reference what they are. So let's actually go now to the dialog flow. So this is our actual program. So if you're using one of those services like Microsoft Lewis, that handles all the natural language processing for you, but then you're expected in your language of choice to actually program the logic of like what to do with those JSON responses. This is kind of a little easier for beginners tool to use. So they kind of abstract all that programming into this GUI. But this is really just a big if-then-else decision tree, is how you can think of it. So let's just start. If we look at this welcome node, right, it's going to say, hello, how are you? But we want to maybe make our app more human and add some variation, right? So we want to make sure it can respond in several different ways. So we could say, let's add a couple different phrases for how we want to greet our users, and we can have those randomly occur. So now when a user tries our chatbot, they should be welcomed with one of 3 different phrases. And we can actually see how that works, right? We could try it here. And you can see Watson's doing its little training thing of that data that we typed in. So that'll just basically be purple throughout the demo since we're going to be changing things all the time. But in this case, it responded as hey as the start of our conversation. If we restart our conversation, right, we get different kind of greetings. And I know that seems really simple, but when I've done kind of feedback from users of how do they like a bot in particular, adding that type of variation, as easy as it is, makes a big difference to the user experience. So let's see what we do, how we actually get it to recognize one of our sentences now. Whoops, close out of this real quick. So that first intent we created was get human, right? So if we say, let's add a node here, and so we're going to try to recognize when someone is asking for a human, right? And so we'll say, okay, if we recognize that someone is asking for a human, we're going to just respond with, sure, please call a number to speak to a representative. Right? So now, hopefully, if our data is trained, we can try this. That's clear, start from scratch, right? Or my super minimalist human example, it should be able to respond with that. Oh yeah, please just call our number to speak to a live person. So now we're handling that, most important case in my mind of someone who really hates your chatbot and doesn't want to deal with it. you can at least provide them some means of talking to an individual. There's a couple things to note here. If you have these little map marker things, we're going to be using these throughout the session. If you click on these kind of help in debugging. So like this message, heyo, came from the welcome node, right? That's what clicking on that kind of shows. So this message here, if we click on it here, right, we know that responded from this get human node. And so then if we also look at this little eyeball, we could see, right, we matched with 100% confidence, right, that 1.00, 100% confidence we matched the correct intent, which makes sense since one of my pieces of training data was literally the same exact phrase that I typed in. So at a high level, this is how this is going to work through the rest of these demos. And so, we have this anything else response. Let me just quickly show you how that works, right? If I just type in something completely unrelated, I don't know, let's say, right, Sam Nasser is the greatest because he is for putting on this event today, right? We get this, I didn't understand, can you try rephrasing? So you want to make sure that your bot handles any input, at least somehow, right? And it could just be as simple as, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, can you try rephrasing the question? Which this is a shame that this bot doesn't know about Sam, but that's how it goes. We need to program that in. All right, so let's evolve this a little bit more, right? So we have our two intents. Our second intent, if you remember, if we go take a look at it, right, was need help. And it was the idea of, like, I need help with something. So this is where we create our entity. Now, we talked about this already today, so I'm going to go through this a little quicker. But we're going to create an entity for a product. So we need to define what we want a product to be. So I may create, let's say we're building a bot to help people with their new purchases of their phones or their computers or things like that. So let's say we want our bot to be able to recognize a computer. Cool. We're gonna train it on that. We're gonna just give a few synonyms for what a computer could be. So it could be a PC, it could be a laptop, you could say Mac, iMac, whatever, and so on. Right. So we'll add that. Cool. Let's do this, right? Let's do also tablets. So maybe, right, an iPad is a synonym for a tablet. Phones. We'll do, an iPhone, a Pixel, Galaxy, right? That's kind of our training data. So how can we actually use these entities now, right? We want to have our chatbot pick these out from the phrases that people type in. So let's head back over to where we're going to program this. And let's add a new node for our condition, for our intent of needing help. And so what I want this to do now is we're just going to come change a setting in here real quick. Oops. I just need to turn this setting on to be able for it to recognize different entities within my phrase. So let's say if it recognized the entity, what was the first one we did? Computer, right? So we'll have the bot respond with, I can help you with your computer. So we got that phrase. Did it delete? For some reason it deleted. I must have been holding down a key. All right. We'll add another response for our product. That was tablet. Let me help you with your tablet. And this is our crudest form of debugging, just so we know exactly what we're talking about. Right. And let's do your phone. Let me help with your phone. And then I'm going to add one more actually here. This is for the case where someone says they need help with something that I have not predefined as an entity. Right. We still need to be able to handle that case. So in this programming language, right, you just kind of say, if it hits this, right, we'll say, what can I help you with will be our phrase. So is this making sense how we're kind of thinking about how to handle these types of scenarios? Yeah, okay. If anyone has questions right throughout, please raise your hand, let me know. But if we take a look now, right, at this, so we can say, I need help with my iPhone. So what we'll notice is it recognized the need help intent, And our product here is a phone. Right? This is exactly like that Lewis JSON response where it's breaking out the intents and the entities that it matched, and we can hover over here and see with what confidence, right, it's finding that. Which is interesting that it only, obviously my need help training data isn't very good because it only matched with 21% confidence, but that's okay. The key is we were able to take that product, that entity that we defined, and now conditionally give an output to that, right? So we could say, okay, let me help you with your phone. Your actual chatbot may then go and kick off some other process or go down a specific dialogue stream to get that user-specific help with your phone. Maybe it'll take a link to an FAQ page to help them, get what they need. So at a high level, that's how these skills work. So let's jump ahead. That was the kind of easier way into it. Example. Here's an example if you create a new chatbot. This is kind of the default template, pre-made template that IBM gives you for like a customer service bot. So if we just look at it real quick, we have these examples of like, okay, this bot is some kind of customer service bot. It's going to allow you to make appointments, right? So here's some training data. Do you have availability next week? I prefer a face visit, right? So luckily they give you lots of training data in here. This bot is going to be able to handle, store hours, what are your hours of operation, things like that. It's also going to be able to request a human agent, right? So they worded this much nicer, right? Connect to an agent instead of just need human, and then store locations and things like that. So that's the lay of the land of this kind of pre-made chatbot. Entity-wise, right? It's going to be able to pick up some pretty cool things too. There's a list of holidays in here, right? So things like, okay, Christmas, Halloween, Independence Day. These are all holidays. That's going to be important for where we list our hours of operation, right? Because holidays, maybe we'll have different hours. And we have other things here like landmarks. So in terms of how do I get directions to your store? This example, I'm guessing, is from New York City. So it's saying, it needs to be able to recognize these landmarks. We won't get into too many of the other entities. And then finally, our actual dialogue where all our logic is written to process this bot. So let's start with just the greetings. If we look in here, this is kind of cool. So instead of just, where I was listing 3 different ways of saying hello, here you can also say, right, to make your bot more personalized, you can say things like, okay, if it's after 4 p.m. and before noon, or 4 a.m. and before noon, you say hello, good morning, or good afternoon, good evening. Right, on each of these here, you can have additional responses based on time of day. And this may not seem like a lot, like I said, but for a really good customer experience, you want to be able to develop all these different variations so that the customer doesn't get bored interacting with your bot. So while it may seem a little tedious to have to program for all this, it does pay off. Yes? I have no clue, right? So I don't know how Watson works in this case. Like I said, I'm doing it just for the purposes of making it a nice, easy demo. That'll really just depend on what language and technology you use to read the documentation and figure out how it's handling it. But for this specifically, I don't know. We can look into it if you want. Cool. But that is a good consideration to make, right? Because that'd be terrible if you're all in UTC and you're telling people good morning and, they're really, it's late at night or something. Times are hard. Mm-hmm. Right, so in this case, this would just be a sequential response. So it would check the first one. If it happens to be the morning, right, it would respond with the morning responses. Yeah, it'll run the first condition that it finds to be true. And that's kind of, right, how you would probably program it. If you're writing this in .NET, that's, you have your switch statement or whatever, and yep, exactly. All right, so let's look at another example. So where are you located? So this is another really neat example of being able to provide, let me show you at least, if I say, hey, it'll tell us good afternoon. Cool. So is it using our localized time? Maybe. Or maybe the server, I'm in the Washington, D.C. region, so we happen to be in the time zone. I have no idea. Let's look at this location example, though. If I say, and before we look at maybe how it's built, let's just say, where are you located? Cool. You can see it recognized the store locations. I have my screen zoomed in so people in the back can see it. So that's why you can't really read it that easily, because it gets chopped off because of the increased font size, right? But we're located on Union Square, blah, blah, blah. We can see, if we click on the little map icon, it hit these two nodes. And you can kind of see when this node is evaluated, it just says go straight to the provide location. So that's cool. So if a user just says, where are you located, you can kind of handle it that way. But if someone says, how do I get to your store from the Empire State Building? I promise that's what I'm writing underneath that icon, right? It's going to be a little bit more intelligent and actually give us directions. And if we click on that, we'll see, once again, it hits these two nodes. So how is that programmed? If we look in here, right, we're checking our entities, our landmark entity, and saying, like, okay, if someone says they're coming from the Empire State Building, if that gets recognized as part of the phrase, right, here's our directions from the Empire State Building. From Times Square, from Grand Central, you'll have different directions. But then, as always, you can kind of see, because there's two blue chats here, in this case, it's only going to tell us these directions if it matches one of those predefined locations. But then it always is going to give us this last one where it just says where we're located. So another thing to consider, right? Make your bots smart. Have them exceed users' expectations if possible, but always have that kind of fail-safe solution so that users aren't disappointed. You just give them the address and they're still happy. They don't know that they could have gotten directions, but they didn't. All right. A few more. Let's look at where's the hours. So this is another cool one. Here, we'll skip ahead, right? You can see in this one, so when someone asks, what are your store hours? We handle a lot of different cases, right? So if I just test this out, when are you open tomorrow? Right, we'll see, okay, we have the intent of your store hours, that gets recognized, and then we see tomorrow, 12:15, right? So it was able to kind of figure out tomorrow is a particular date, and then we can do things with that. Where there's these functions in this language, right, which convert basically that date to the day of the week, and we can have different, outputs. Our hours on Sundays are 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that's the kind of things you want to program for. If we, just as one more example, right, are you open on, 1/1, right, we are closed on New Year's. So that's because we programmed one of our entities to be New Year's Day, and a synonym for New Year's Day is 1/1, or you can just tell based on the date entity as well. Those are the kinds of things you want to be aware of because it makes a big difference. Yeah. So yeah, so let's actually take a look. That's a good point. So in this case, right, this is a way to just reuse your code. So whenever we respond to what are your hours, this is programmed to then jump to our provide location node. Because if someone's asking about hours, it wouldn't hurt to tell them where you're located. So that's another thing too, where as a programmer, my initial intention when I would program this, my initial reaction to this would be, okay, it wants to know what hours are open. Let me just program what hours are open. Take it a step further to actually help the user, right? The user asks, what hours are you open? Tell them what hours you're open, and be smart about holidays and what day of the week and everything else is going on, but also try to provide more value. It's like if someone's asking about your hours of operation, just tell them where your location is, or whatever other additional pieces of information you could provide. Maybe you provide a map of your location or something like that. So that's just an example of it being a little bit smarter, a little bit more human. Yeah, right. I mean, that's up to you as the programmer to design this however you want. Yes. I don't know. What do you do if there are multiple stores with different hours? Sure, you can, right? You can do whatever you want. All of these platforms, right? Whether you use this Watson one or whether you use the Microsoft products, at the end of the day, it's still up to you as the developer to program this thing to work correctly. So yeah, if you have lots of locations, you may ask a follow-up question of like, okay, well, where are you located? Or you use one of the location APIs in a browser to, say, do you want to share your location so that it can find the closest store? All of these examples, right, you would probably never want to hard code your hours into any of these apps or into your code like that. You would probably want to go query a database where that information is centralized. Or maybe you have an API, right, available that tells you that information. That's a good point, right? The demo world that I'm presenting now is not exactly the real world. You would have more interactions with calling out to an API or a database to be able to do that. I believe you can call out to APIs. Yep. What's that? Yeah. Like I said, I haven't used all of them. I know the Azure Bot service, right? Those are just a lot of different programming SDKs. So whatever you can do in your language, and I mean most languages, I would hope nowadays can call APIs. I mean .NET, Python, Java, all those definitely can. I'm sure there's some old school languages that can't very easily, but yeah, one of the hard things with this is that there's so many possibilities of what you can do. You need to pick some constraints somewhere so that you actually build your product and get it done. But yeah, all of the different tools, doesn't matter who your vendor is, doesn't matter what tool set, tech stack you use, as long as it's modern, it's going to be able to do all these things. So, good questions. Let me show you, we only got a few minutes left, and we'll have more time at the end as well. Let me show you two more examples that I think are really important to be aware of. So first, let's look at this example of, let me check in my notes here. Yeah, customer care appointments. All right, so this is that example of needing to collect multiple pieces of information. So the way you do it in this tool is you just kind of list it here as, they call it slotting, and you need to collect all these pieces of information. And some of these pieces of information are required, some of them are optional. Let's just see how it works, right? If I say, I'd like an appointment, it will return and say, what day would you like to come in? And I could say Tuesday. And what time on Tuesday? 2 p.m. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, right? I'll say cancel, which is important to be able to handle too. To let a user escape out of some sequence you've created for them. But let's say I want to be smarter. I want to say I would like an appointment next Thursday with Derek. And I'm sorry that you can't see that. It's because of how I have my screen zoomed in. With Derek at 5 p.m. You'll see it up there in a minute. Right? So it was able to recognize all these different intents. Right? I'd like an appointment is our intent, and it knows next Thursday is an entity. Derek, I guess, is the name of one of the doctors, is an entity. 5 p.m. is an entity. And so the response is very intelligent. It just skips having to ask all those questions, right, and making it really laborious for me to get through. And it just says, great, let me just confirm this is what you said. Right? This is the ultimate goal. This used to be something, right, that was really hard when you'd use different natural language processing algorithms. Initially they'd be really good at picking out one idea from your sentence, one entity or something like that. But nowadays, all the modern ones, right, they do a really good job of picking out multiple different entities from your phrases. And so use that to your advantage and program your bots to be able to handle these complex user statements. Because it does make a much better customer experience, right? So then I could say, yes, or whatever, and it'll okay, it's asking me for a phone number. That's fine. We don't have to go with that. We'll say cancel. We always have an escape route for our user. And the last thing I just want to kind of talk about, when we looked at this in one of the Amazon examples, but if we go to, right, the kind of please transfer me to an agent category here, well, here, let me show you it this way. Let's see if I say human, is it going to recognize it? Yeah, cool. So this is an example, right? Our chatbots don't just need to be open-ended inputs from the user. In this case, right, we programmed, just a button or a link of saying yes or no. So instead of making the user type something in, now granted, recognizing a user say yes or no is a pretty easy thing, but imagine you had some more complicated statement. You can guide the user's responses by, programming in something yes or no or whatever. And that does that. And I mean, and that's just something, right, when you're programming, try to think about, if there is a very limited set of responses that a user can give you, go Amazon's route, right, with returns, and just give someone a selection of a few different things that they can do. Because honestly, that's probably easier than actually having to type something in, especially if you're on a mobile device, right? It's a lot harder to type than just press a button for, one of 4 options. So you could have your chatbots do that. You can have your chatbots incorporate things like images and things like that. Don't just think that this has to be like a instant messaging window where all you're doing is typing back and forth with a human. I mean, you could really extend these applications to do lots of different things, interact with lots of different APIs and databases that you already have about your customers, maybe, and that's really good there. And so, in summary, I don't even think I really have a summary. I think that's it. So, thank you all very much. I hope that was good. We do have a couple minutes for questions, but I'll also be here for a little bit today. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.